The wedding hall glittered with crystal lights, gold-trimmed chairs, and the kind of luxury that screamed old money. Soft classical music floated through the air as guests in designer suits and diamond-studded gowns laughed confidently, sipping expensive champagne. This was the Harrington family wedding, one of the most respected elite families in the city. Everything was perfect, everything except her. She stood near the entrance, fingers nervously gripping the fabric of her simple pastel dress. No diamonds. No designer label, no entourage, just quiet grace and uncertain eyes. Her name was Elena, the bride's childhood friend and distant cousin, invited more out of obligation than affection. From the moment she stepped inside, whispers followed her like shadows. Who invited her? Is she staff? That dress, is that from a local store? Soft chuckles turned into barely hidden laughter. The groom's family didn't even try to hide their amusement. Elena felt it all, the judgment, the mockery, the silent comparisons. She kept her head down, reminding herself why she came. I'm here for my sister-like friend. Nothing else matters. But to them she was entertainment. At one table the groom's aunt leaned forward and laughed openly, so sweet of her to attend. I heard she works 3 jobs just to survive. Another woman smirked. Some people really don't understand class, do they? The groom himself glanced at Elena briefly, then looked away embarrassed, as if her presence alone lowered the value of his wedding. No one noticed the way Elena's hands trembled. No one noticed the quiet dignity with which she swallowed her pain. And no one, absolutely no one, noticed the black luxury convoy slowly pulling up outside the venue. Elena took a seat in the back row, far from the spotlight, far from the laughter. She didn't complain. She didn't defend herself. She simply sat there, silent, waiting. What they didn't know, what they could never imagine, was that Elena wasn't alone. And that the man about to walk through those doors wasn't just a guest. He was her brother. And not just any brother. He was a billionaire. The laughter inside the wedding hall was suddenly interrupted not by a voice, but by silence. The kind of silence that falls when something powerful arrives. Outside, the soft hum of engines echoed. One black luxury car, then another and another. 6 vehicles in total. All identical, all flawless, all stopping in perfect alignment at the entrance. The valley froze. Guests near the doors turned around, confused. Then the doors opened. A man stepped out, tall, calm, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit that fit him like it was designed by fate itself. No flashy jewelry, no unnecessary display, just quiet authority. His eyes scanned the venue with sharp intelligence, as if he already owned every inch of the place. Behind him walked 2 men in subtle security attire, followed by a woman holding a tablet, whispering updates. People started murmuring, "Who is that? Is he a politician? No, wait, I know that face." Inside the hall, the groom's father frowned. He didn't like surprises, especially not ones that arrived uninvited. The bride paused mid-conversation, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Elena felt it too. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She felt it in her chest, the same feeling she'd felt years ago when she was scared, broke, and standing at a bus stop with nowhere to go, and he came for her. The man walked in slowly, every step measured. Conversations died one by one. Even the music seemed to fade into the background. He stopped near the entrance, letting his presence settle. Then his eyes found her. Elena, sitting alone, head lowered, surrounded by people who had laughed at her pain. Something hardened in his expression, not anger, not rage, but something far more dangerous, control. He walked forward. People instinctively moved aside. Chairs scraped the floor. Champagne glasses were lowered. The groom's mother whispered nervously, "Why is he coming this way?" Elena finally looked up. Their eyes met, and for the first time that night she smiled. A small, tired smile, but real. The man stopped in front of her and spoke softly, but clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Did they treat you well?" Elena shook her head gently, not wanting trouble. "I'm okay," she said. "It's not important." He inhaled slowly. Then he did something that made the entire room freeze. He reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder, not as a gesture of ownership, but protection. "My sister," he said calmly, his voice steady but unmistakably powerful, "you don't ever have to pretend you're okay." A wave of shock moved through the hall. "Sister? Did he say sister?" "Wait, no way." The groom's aunt's face turned pale. The women who laughed earlier suddenly couldn't meet Elena's eyes. The man turned around slowly, finally addressing the room. "My name is Adrian Vale," he said. "I wasn't invited. But when my sister is humiliated, invitations stop mattering." That name landed like thunder. Whispers exploded. "Adrian Vale, the tech billionaire? The man who owns half the companies in this city." The groom's father stood up abruptly, his confident smile gone. The groom himself looked like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Adrian looked back at Elena once more and said quietly, "Sit. Watch. I've got the rest." And at that moment, everyone realized this wedding was no longer about love. It was about reckoning. For a few seconds, no one moved. The wedding hall that had been filled with laughter, gossip, and quiet cruelty just moments ago now felt suffocating. Every eye was locked on Adrian Vale. The groom's family sat frozen, their confidence draining with every passing heartbeat. The groom's mother was the first to recover, panic hidden behind forced elegance. She stood up quickly, smoothing her designer dress. "There must be some misunderstanding," she said with a tight smile. "We didn't know. Elena was your sister." Adrian looked at her calmly. "You didn't ask," he replied. "You judged instead." The words were simple, but they cut deeper than shouting ever could. The groom finally stood, his voice shaky. "Sir, I had no idea." Elena never mentioned. "Of course she didn't," Adrian interrupted, turning his gaze toward him. "She was taught very early that her worth depended on how little space she took." Elena felt her throat tighten. Adrian gestured gently for her to stand. She hesitated, her old instinct telling her to stay quiet, to stay invisible. But when she looked at her brother, she saw the same look he had worn years ago, the day he found her sleeping on a bus bench with a single bag and nowhere left to go. She stood. The room watched her differently now. The same woman they had mocked, suddenly untouchable. "You laughed at her dress," Adrian continued, his voice steady but growing colder. "You laughed at her background. You laughed because you thought she was alone." He paused. "She wasn't." The groom's father cleared his throat. "We are respectable people," he said stiffly. "No one meant any harm. It was just light humor." Adrian's eyes finally hardened. "Light humor," he repeated. "You publicly humiliated my sister at her own wedding." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin folder. "Do you know why Elena wears simple clothes?" he asked. "Because when she had nothing, she promised herself she'd never become someone who measured people by appearances." A murmur spread across the hall. "She worked 2 jobs while studying," Adrian continued. "Refused my money, refused my name. She wanted to be loved for who she is, not for who I am." He turned toward the groom. "And you," Adrian said quietly, "let your family laugh while she stood alone." The groom opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Elena's hands trembled at her sides. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted revenge. But something inside her shifted. For the first time in her life, someone was speaking for her without asking her to shrink. Adrian placed the folder on the table. "This wedding," he said calmly, "is being funded by the Vale Foundation." Gasps filled the room. "Yes," Adrian continued. "The venue, the catering, the decorators, even the band. You signed contracts without reading the fine print." He looked directly at the groom's father. "I own this hall." Silence slammed into the room. The groom's mother collapsed back into her chair. "And right now," Adrian added, "I'm deciding whether this celebration continues or ends." Elena finally spoke. "Adrian," she whispered, "I don't want to destroy anyone." He softened instantly and turned back to her. "I know," he said gently. "That's why you're different from them." He looked back at the guests. "But dignity," he said, his voice firm again, "is non-negotiable." The groom took a step toward Elena, desperation written all over his face. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I should have stopped them. Please give me another chance." Elena looked at him, really looked. The man who had smiled while others laughed at her. The man who had stayed silent. And for the first time, she didn't feel small. She took a breath. And the room waited. The hall was so quiet that Elena could hear her own breathing. Every eye stayed fixed on her, waiting, judging, hoping. The groom stood in front of her, his apology hanging in the air, like a question that demanded an answer. His voice had sounded sincere, but something about it felt rushed, rehearsed. Elena looked at Adrian. He nodded once, not in command, but in support. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a guest in her own story. She stepped forward. "I don't need another chance," Elena said softly, yet her voice carried across the room. "I needed respect, and I didn't get that." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. "I grew up learning how to survive quietly," she continued. "When people laughed, I smiled. When they ignored me, I stayed silent. I thought that was strength." She paused. "I was wrong." The groom swallowed hard. "When your family laughed at me today," Elena said, looking directly at him, "I waited for you to stop them." She shook her head slowly. "You didn't." The groom's mother tried to interrupt. "She's emotional. This is a stressful day." Adrian raised one finger. "Let her finish." Elena took a breath. "This wedding," she said calmly, "was supposed to be the beginning of a partnership." She looked around the lavish hall. "But I realized something important," she continued. "If I walk into a marriage where I already have to beg for dignity, it will only get worse." The groom stepped closer. "I swear I'll protect you now," he said urgently. "Things will be different." Elena met his eyes. "Protection after humiliation," she replied, "is just guilt." The words hit harder than any slap. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Elena turned toward the guests, the same people who had whispered behind her back. "You all saw me as less," she said, "not because of who I am, but because of what you assumed I had." She lifted her chin. "But today," she said, "I learned that silence doesn't make you noble, it makes you invisible." She turned back to Adrian. "I don't want revenge," she said quietly. "I want truth." Adrian nodded. He turned to the groom's family. "This wedding will continue," Adrian said calmly, but not under false respect. Confusion spread across their faces. "Elena will decide," Adrian added, "whether she walks down that aisle or walks away with her dignity intact." The groom's father stood up angrily. "You would destroy months of planning over feelings." Adrian's reply was ice cold. "You destroyed her trust in minutes." Elena closed her eyes for a moment. She imagined herself walking down the aisle smiling, pretending nothing had happened. Then she imagined walking away. Only one future. Let her breathe. She opened her eyes. "I won't marry into a family that laughed at my existence," Elena said firmly. A collective shock swept the hall. The groom whispered, "You can't do this." Elena's voice didn't shake. "I already did." She removed the engagement ring and placed it gently on the table. "This isn't rejection," she said. "It's self-respect." Tears filled the groom's eyes. The guests stared, some ashamed, some stunned. Adrian stepped beside her and placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. Elena smiled faintly. For the first time, she replied, "I know." And just when everyone thought it was over, the doors at the back of the hall slowly opened, and someone unexpected walked in. The doors at the back of the hall opened wider. A slow murmur spread through the guests as a tall, sharply dressed man walked in, followed by two assistants. His presence alone carried authority, quiet, controlled, undeniable. The groom's father frowned. "Who allowed this interruption?" Adrian didn't turn around. "I did." The man stopped beside Adrian and nodded respectfully. "My name is Victor Hale," he announced calmly. "I'm the chief legal advisor for the Westbridge Holdings Group." The groom's mother stiffened. Westbridge Holdings was one of the largest private financial firms in the country, the same firm funding half of their family's real estate empire. Victor continued. "I was asked to attend today," he said, looking around the room, "to observe a merger discussion scheduled after this wedding." Confusion rippled through the guests. The groom looked at his father. "What merger?" Victor opened a slim folder. "The Hale Kensington Partnership," he said. A deal transferring controlling shares of 3 commercial properties. Upon completion of this marriage, silence crashed over the room. The groom's father stood abruptly. That agreement is conditional? Victor nodded. Yes, conditional upon mutual respect, ethical conduct, and reputational stability. His eyes slowly moved toward Elena, conditions which, he added, were just violated. A sharp gasp escaped the groom's mother. That's absurd, she snapped. She's no one. Victor looked at her, calm, unreadable. Actually, he said, she is. He turned toward Elena. Miss Hale, he said respectfully, you are the sole beneficiary of the Hale family trust. The room froze. Elena's breath caught. I what? She whispered. Victor smiled slightly. Your brother didn't want your identity used as leverage, he explained. So you lived freely without the shadow of wealth. The groom stumbled back a step. Adrian finally spoke. I didn't give her money, he said evenly. I gave her choice. The groom's father's face turned pale. You mean she owns 62% of the assets tied to this partnership? Victor finished. The whispers turned into shock-filled murmurs. The groom turned to Elena, panic flooding his face. Elena, please, he said urgently. We can fix this. She looked at him, not with anger, with clarity. You didn't love me when you thought I had nothing, she said quietly. So don't pretend now that numbers changed your heart. Tears streamed down the groom's mother's face. Victor closed the folder. Due to today's events, he said, the Hale Trust formally withdraws from all negotiations with the Kensington family. The groom's father collapsed back into his chair. Our properties, our investors, will be reevaluated, Victor replied coolly. Immediately, the groom whispered, broken. You ruined everything. Elena shook her head. No, she said softly. You revealed it. She turned toward the guests, the same faces that once smirked at her. I came here believing I had to earn my place, she said. But I understand now. She took a breath. I never needed permission to belong. Adrian stepped closer. Are you ready to leave? He asked gently. Elena nodded. As they walked toward the exit, the groom called out. Elena, was any of it real? She stopped, turned. Yes, she said honestly. My feelings were real. Then she added, your respect wasn't. She walked away. The doors closed behind her, and inside the hall, everything they thought was unshakable began to crumble. Outside, Elena inhaled deeply. For the first time in her life, she wasn't surviving, she was choosing, and tomorrow she would decide who she truly wanted to become. The cold evening air wrapped around Elena as she stepped outside the wedding hall. For a moment, she just stood there. No cameras, no whispers, no judgment, only truth. Adrian placed his coat gently over her shoulders. You didn't have to say anything in there, he said softly. You already said enough by standing. Elena smiled faintly. For years, she replied, I thought strength meant staying quiet so people would accept me. She looked up at him. Now I know, strength is knowing when to leave. They got into the car. As it pulled away, the grand hall behind them shrank into the distance along with the life Elena once believed she needed. 1 month later, the headline spread quietly but decisively across business. Circles, Hale Trust withdraws, Kensington Empire under investigation. Banks froze accounts. Investors vanished overnight. Projects were halted mid-construction. The same families who once laughed behind their hands now avoided eye contact. Power, Elena realized, was fragile when built on arrogance. Elena didn't return to luxury. She returned to purpose. In a modest building near the river, a new foundation opened its doors, the Hale Women's Initiative, a place for women who had been dismissed, underestimated, and silenced just like she once was. Elena sat at a simple desk on her first day, reviewing applications herself. No special treatment, she told her team. Only fairness. Adrian watched her from the doorway, pride evident but quiet. You could have owned the world, he said. She smiled. I chose to build one. The groom's engagement was officially dissolved within weeks. His parents sold their mansion to cover debts. Invitations stopped coming. And the same people who once applauded their cruelty now pretended they'd never known them. At a small cafe across the city, Elena once spotted him. He looked older, smaller. He recognized her, lowered his eyes, and said nothing. Neither did she. Some endings don't need words. One evening, as the sun dipped into gold, Elena stood on the balcony of her apartment. Adrian joined her. "Do you regret anything?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Yes," she said gently. "I regret believing I had to prove my worth to people who never earned my respect." She turned toward him. "But I'm grateful," she added, "that they showed me who I was before I forgot." Adrian raised his glass. To Elena he said, "A woman who didn't rise by destroying others, but by refusing to be destroyed." She smiled, and for the first time, not as someone's fiancée, not as a billionaire's sister, but as herself. They laughed at her because they thought she was small. They lost everything because they forgot. Quiet people don't lack power. They're just choosing when to use it.